from our VP, who unfortunately could not be here, but is going to has sent us his opening remarks via a recorded message.
Dear colleagues, the path to post-pandemic recovery will not be easy, and the way forward is green, resilient, and inclusive growth through integrated and partnership-driven knowledge solutions. Knowledge is crucial to help our DMCs recover and build resilience. Learning from our peers in the community is a must to fuel a holistic and agile response to the crisis. Let me share 3 ideas on how we can do this. First is building knowledge bridges. This means linking past with present knowledge, connecting with experts, and allowing great participation from our DMCs to plan their own development pathways. For instance, ADB's recent publication assessing the impact of COVID-19 on online job postings in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka helped the 2 countries to better understand the impact of this crisis in real time for job recovery. Second is strengthening partnerships. Collaboration and synergy will allow knowledge to flow seamlessly. ADB has over 150 knowledge partnerships and is growing. We must collectively ensure that we engage with the best and capture that knowledge to apply in our operations. And the third is creating a culture not only of knowledge sharing, but also of debate, agree to disagree, be inclusive in the way we generate knowledge. Everybody's opinion matters. Our culture transformation initiative is key to ensure that we develop the best fit and relevant knowledge for our DMCs. The need to learn from other organizations is crucial, and I want to thank our session panelists today, including Ede Ijjasz, who will share his experiences from the World Bank on building a knowledge management ecosystem in his time there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the session.
Thank you very much. I believe we had some little minor trouble in the streaming at the beginning. I'll just repeat some of the messages that I just gave. First and foremost, let's see how good my memory is in doing this. One, incredible lineup of speakers today who will be talking about their personal journey, their reflections on how they are trying to work in a multilateral development bank such as ours or others such as the World Bank in debating and balancing the knowledge portfolio with the lending portfolio. We also made a couple of announcements on just making sure that this is an interactive session, a lively session. Our panelists are very ready to be provocative. So drop in your questions as well in the comment box. And with that, I would now like to introduce Ede Ijjasz. He has more than 20 years of experience of working at the World Bank in many senior leader positions, including Latin America, Africa, as well as in Asia. Now he is writing a book on knowledge management, which talks about how there are comparative advantages to global organizations who adopt KM in a good way. Ede, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek, and it's a great pleasure to be with you today. This is an exciting platform to exchange ideas about what I believe is fundamental for multilateral development organizations, and that is knowledge management. I'm going to share a presentation just to have a little bit of visuals to accompany some of these ideas. And many of these are going to be in our upcoming book that we are preparing on knowledge management as really a comparative advantage of global organizations that is going to be published by Routledge next year. But in the context of the conversation today, we have an important challenge as multilateral development banks. The development challenges of today are more and more complicated. So it was difficult enough to deal with climate change and urbanization and issues of education for all and quality. And now on top of it all, then COVID-19 comes as a pandemic that completely disrupts our lives. So really wicked development challenges, and at the same time, information overload. The amount of reports, policy notes that are prepared by the multilateral organizations, by research groups, by universities, by consulting companies is just overwhelming. And therefore the question is, how can you handle that? How do you actually do projects? How do you actually support your clients and at the same time handle that? And on top of that, really complex matrix extractors of these organizations. Just to give you a sense of my trajectory in the World Bank and why knowledge management was always something so important for me and our teams. I was manager of a global water and sanitation program. And when I came, I had a staff in Latin America, in South Asia, in East Asia, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, all working about water and sanitation. And you would tend to think that, look, everybody needs water, everybody needs a toilet. What is so different? Well, 4 really deep, strong silos had been formed, and they were not talking to each other on something that is such a human nature. Then I moved to China, where I was the manager for infrastructure and sustainable development for the World Bank program. And this is where I met Vice President Chen, who was kind of my counterpart. And the big question of the Chinese clients was like, look, we had this problem. What are these solutions out there that have been done? And in many cases, actually, there were no solutions. So it was a process of co-creation with the client, bringing examples from around the world of developing nations and saying, look, what does it work? What makes sense here? Then I was a global director for a technical team of about 700 staff in 90 country offices all around the world that covered the topics of cities, of social development, of disaster risk management, and of rural development. And therefore, look, we had 4 groups, we had 90 resident missions. How do you bring all of that together in a really complex organization in a way that you are delivering the best for your clients, in a way that you're really being helpful for the people? Now, many of those of the organizations really take traditional approaches. One means is that, look, we just have the knowledge management teams. They are going to do the work. They are in charge of knowledge management, and they are in these backroom offices, and they are sifting through documents and trying to extract knowledge and put it out there in that process. But those who are doing operations and those who are doing projects, that's not our job. Big mistake. Second, massive overload of connections and collaboration. The messages from leadership are, okay, everybody needs to collaborate. And it becomes a collaboration kumbaya and a Gordian knot that makes it extremely difficult to really find solutions. And at the other extreme, some project managers are just lonely out there trying to figure out solutions, trying to read whatever it is in a corner of the institution, trying to solve the problems of the clients without knowing that there's a whole universe of people who are doing the same. And therefore, the message of our book is to say, look, knowledge management can be at the core of comparative advantage of organizations if 2 conditions are met. First, leadership says, no, this is not a backroom function. This is central to what is it that we're going to do as a team. And second, when every knowledge the team member is a knowledge worker, when they feel that it is that the responsibility. Now, the advantage of knowledge, actually, we always saw it as the opportunity to break silos. Knowledge is not only what people tend to think, produce reports, do analysis, compare, take notes from other countries, but actually it is an extremely important tool to break organizational silos, to be able to have people. I always used to describe it as an open floor room where you have your desk, you know exactly what you're doing, but you look all around and you see what are your colleagues doing in other sectors, in other countries, in other regions, and then you learn from each other, and it is that flow of knowledge that breaks those silos. And that's helpful because no matter what structure you have, there are always challenges, and those silos can break into the inefficiency of the organization. Let me talk about 4 myths that are very common in this situation. First, oh no, I have too much to deliver. I have my project to deliver by the end of the fiscal year. There's too much pressure from my manager. I have no time for knowledge management. Well, the reality is that everybody who's working in development one of the passions that I found over the years, team after team, is that they really want to tackle some of the most difficult development challenges. The ones that want to work and co-create with the team solutions, they want to bring some of the best knowledge. And some of those really are multi-sectoral, they are multidimensional. They really need to figure out how to tackle those. Myth number 2, no, I know what the client needs. And that happens sometimes in ADB, in large offices, and in the World Bank in large offices. When I was in the China office, my team was like, no, we know what it is that the client needs. Why do we need to go outside? This is part of, we've been doing it this way. The same was in Brazil. The same was in South Africa. And therefore, being able to break that myth and say, no, actually, what your client needs is really examples of what worked and what hasn't worked around the country. Myth number 3. Actually, if we can have a good IT system that allows us to extract information, then everything will be solved. If we can have like a Google search internally of every document and everything, and then they get pre-processed with artificial intelligence, we are done. And I'm not saying that that's not needed. Those systems are fundamental for as part of knowledge management, but we found that those are necessary but not sufficient conditions to do that process. And many organizations spend too much time on that direction. And then finally, myth number 4 is like, look, we cannot have it all. You want me efficiency and deliver projects fast? You want quality so that the objectives are being met, or you want creativity? We cannot have it all. And part of what we work in knowledge management is that it is possible to have it all into this process. What we center, and part of the premise of the book, is to say, look, at the core, knowledge management is not an abstract thing. It is all centered around communities of practice that they take different forms and shapes. In our case, we actually call them knowledge silo breakers, to give the signals to teams. This is not just a conversation among your peers. This is really a connector across different disciplines, different regions, different experiences all together. And we use what we call the garden approach. And the garden approach is not, I repeat, it's not 1,000 flowers bloom. You let it grow all together. A good gardener is the one that actually waits for a year, see which are the shrubs that are going to give the better flower. It starts moving around and it starts connecting in different ways to tend the garden, to let the flowers bloom, but to give a little bit of a sense, structure, support, so that those connections and that pollination can happen all across. Now, we were always very specific, and I think that this is important for global organizations. Headquarters is not the location of knowledge. It does not have the monopoly of knowledge. The real knowledge that clients need happens in the resident missions, happens in the country offices. It is that interaction with the government, with the private sector, with the stakeholders, with communities, that actually allows in the day-to-day of development solutions to emerge. And global knowledge is not something that is done in Manila or in Washington. Global knowledge is the accumulation, the aggregation of those very, very practical solutions. I'll end with a few things that we work really hard on cultural change. First, look outside. Large organizations tend to be very navel-gazing. Because that's the easiest. You're just talking to the people around you in your office. And the cultural change of saying, look, even if you have a community of practice inside the World Bank, that is not enough for us. This needs to be global communities of practice that connect across organizations, that bring different institutional initiatives, that connect to think tanks in the countries to be able to really, really become centers of excellence in this process. Second, knowledge management and these communities really at the core, they need to lead diversity and inclusion, which is an important theme for many multilateral development banks, where, look, you need to bring all of these different perspectives, these different education trajectories, these different experiences to bring the best knowledge to our clients. And therefore, the agenda of the diversity and inclusion and the agenda of knowledge management are a lot more connected than you ever thought. And a really important cultural change that I personally had a really hard time in the World Bank was to say, we can fail. There needs to be a culture of failure, because if you are not innovating enough, then you're not failing. And therefore, if you are just want to have perfection into everything that you do, then you're not failing. And development is really difficult. Development is a pathway that needs to experiment, solve problems, we are moving to that direction, moving to this other, and then eventually come to a solution. Therefore, knowledge management is also not only describing the end solution, but it's also describing that journey so that others can learn into this process. For example, in the World Bank and all of the multilateral development organizations, they have project evaluation reports, but those tend to be very formal, very organized, and we did a secret evaluation report series where we really told the story of how challenging these development projects are. And it's good because they're secret. Everybody wants to read secret documents, but it's also ones that allows for the honesty and the process. And again, it's not the reports, it's the communities that are built around to be able to do this cultural change. And at the end, it's all about leadership. If this is given to a knowledge management team or a knowledge management department or a learning group, then it doesn't happen, because that separation means that the leadership is not really taking advantage of those tools, taking advantage of those solutions. So leadership means that the managers and the director generals and the vice presidents need to maintain that curiosity, need to be able to always talk about the value that knowledge and innovation brings to the organization, needs to be able to do practical events where the knowledge generators, the community leaders, those that are really experimenting and are the entrepreneurs in the organization are really being able to get the attention, the visibility, and the support that happens. And then leadership in the end needs to be able to push the organization and to push the teams to say, this is important. Are you delivering? What are the metrics that you're doing? How do you know that you're actually moving forward in this space of knowledge organization? Many of the themes that hopefully we'll talk today in this conversation, and this was just a brief opening, and more details in the book. Stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ede. So much to digest. But what I'll do is, without further ado, let's introduce our panel right now, and then we'll get this conversation going. You can see our comment box is already lighting up with so many inputs already based on what you said, and I'll touch upon a few of these things as we go ahead. First, I would like to introduce Leah Gutierrez, who is the Director General of the Pacific region here at ADB. Leah, welcome to the stage. Then I'd like to introduce Ms. Teresa Ko, who is the Director General for the East Asia Department. And then lastly, but not the least, Ms. Xiao Hong Yang, who is the Chief Thematic Officer for the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department here, which is also known as our Knowledge Department. So welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Firstly, Leah, let me start with you. So much to digest from what Ede has said about just what we do. You bring with yourself 20 plus years of experience being in ADB. What is the Pacific region perspective? How has your work changed with regards to the viewpoint of knowledge?
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this one, Vivek and colleagues. This is a great opportunity to share what's going on the knowledge front and how we're planning to go forward. So for us, as I really like what Ede said earlier about everyone is a knowledge worker. And this is actually a takeoff point when we start doing our work in anything that we do. That is, everything that we do should actually have that should have embedded in it the knowledge that we have gained from the others, and then we actually have to share that knowledge. And also, at the same time, as Ede did say, we have to co-create with our counterparts. So in the case of the Pacific, we do have, how do we actually share knowledge? Knowledge sharing is embedded in the designs of our projects. We also work together with our counterparts through what we have in the form of technical assistance. And then, of course, we ourselves directly, we always are in conversations with our counterparts and provide direct advice. Now, over the years, what I've seen is that I think knowledge has always been in what we do. What has evolved over the years is the way we share the knowledge. What of late, of course, what we are seeing is that more and more, of course, the traditional one is you write a working paper, you write a working paper, or you write a pamphlet, a book, etc. And then that's considered knowledge sharing, and then it's part of knowledge management. But what's great these days is because also of technology is that we have other means. We can do blogs, vlogs, And this is actually a channel that's being used by several of my Pacific colleagues and colleagues around the bank, as you very well know. And now the real challenge for us these days is how to better capture this knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge embedded, taking off from every person is a knowledge worker. How do we actually capture this tacit knowledge? How can we better share it amongst our colleagues? This is still a challenge. More and more colleagues are more and more colleagues are doing blogs, etc. But I know that these days, because of technology, because of the pandemic, the virtual setting, more and more are attending actually the virtual sharing, the virtual seminars, which is really great. And I do hope that as we go to a new normal, this will continue. So with that, so I will pause for
Thank
now.
you.
Vivek, thank you.
Just to let everyone know who's watching, if they couldn't catch the technical glitch, I've requested all the panelists to jump in and answer it, not in any order, so that it's more conversational. Ede, how do you react to Leah when she says, how do we make everyone a knowledge worker?
Leah has a very important point, which is there are many more tools. Look, 10, 15 years ago, knowledge was seen as we need to write the reports, okay? And this is what counts, and these are the deliverables. Well, in reality, or the evaluation reports of projects. But turns out that the evaluation report of projects takes 5 years of implementation and a year of writing. In this day and age, the speed is such that 6 years is an eternity. And therefore, what Leah was saying, blocks, super important. What we did in our team was to say, look, we had the knowledge management team here, and then we had the communications team, and they actually didn't talk to each other. And I always said, look, these are the same products. In the end, it's knowledge, and you are using different tools to communicate. How do you actually break those silos? And the knowledge management team and the communications team actually are part and integral. So we had not only the message, everybody's a knowledge worker, we had the message, everybody is a communicator. If you do your project and you report and you're only disseminating to 150 people, that is a failure. That is a failure. How? Because there's not only your clients that want to know, is society at large, is the communities that are engaged, is other countries with similar structures. Finally, in the end, we found that we didn't obsess too much about the tools. We obsess about the communities, because in the end, it's the talking that happens. It is really the mentoring from people with more experience to less experience. It is people who are having similar problems in different countries that are trying to solve these issues and that need to talk to each other. That's where the real knowledge happens to be. Our challenge was, how do you actually use part of that energy to write it up in a way that those other communities learn and start building links into this process? And how do you find countries that have similar experiences? So for us, when I was in Latin America, the Caribbean was like, look, we're not interested about Brazil. That's a totally different universe. We want to learn about the Pacific Islands or Singapore or other small islands. How do we connect them? How do you find those people who are working all together? And the ADB is doing excellent work in connecting across the small island states. I was always really happy to see how much energy there was around what are some of the most intractable development challenges in the small nations. Back to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Ede. I think that's a good segue to Teresa. Teresa, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in East Asia, and how are you making sure that knowledge is like the catalyst for your lending portfolio there?
Yeah, I really appreciate what Leia and Eddie have just shared, because we exactly faced the same challenge, but because we have two countries, China and Mongolia. But since we do have China, which is an upper middle income country, the demands for knowledge, not only the north south, but also the south south sharing, became very challenging at one point. And what we found, what helped us, was the institution of some key processes that we introduced in order to internalize and instill knowledge in our operations. So let me just share with you what we did last year. We actually started a planning process where we conducted consultations with key ministries in China, finding out what is it that matters to them, looking at the topics where they believe the north-south sharing would be essential. And in the course of actually doing that, we also examined how do we communicate and share eventually what we learn and what we co-create. And what we also found was that while we have a communication plan, we were not approaching it as strategically as we can. And so what we did was we started partnering with DOC, with our Department of External Communications, and we started instituting a process of actually shaping our communication plan early in the cycle for the following year, so that we can determine, one, how do we share, which different products can we put a certain theme under, and most importantly, how do we also make a maximum use of available media and available platforms, and even look at partnerships as a way in which we can get our message out of South-South sharing in the experience that we have in China. And what we found, what really helped us, was that this planning process enabled us to go from shaping, from planning, into actually embedding it into our formal work plans, all the way cascading to individual work plans, allowing us not only to demonstrate our commitment, but also to have ease in execution and focus. And I believe this is something that really helped us during this year in terms of going through our knowledge management process. So let me stop here and turn it back to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Teresa. There is a lot of any thoughts? Any thoughts before I go to the next question? Leah, anything?
No, I could agree more with Teresa, in the sense that that early planning actually was one of the most important cultural changes in our team. Why? Because everybody was so focused on your knowledge product, or so focused on your project. And then once they had the final draft, they come and say, oh, how do we disseminate? How do we do knowledge sharing on that? And then it's too late. Then it's too late, because, again, it's the pace of development that needs to be so much faster into this process. So that planning becomes important, because it's not, knowledge management doesn't become an add-on. It becomes an integral part of the business altogether. The other thing that we did in our team was that, for us, the delivery of knowledge product was as important as the delivery of lending. Why? Because we were saying, look, it's not either or. I know that the tradition has been, you need to do the lending, you need to do the projects, and that's what counts for your career and incentives, etc. But in reality, the best projects are the ones that are based into knowledge. So it's not either or, it's knowledge for lending. It's really this process of connecting the two in really fundamental ways. And then finally, on North-South, actually, we realized that sometimes it's also South-North. We had a big series of knowledge sharing platforms on crime and violence. And we had New York, Chicago, Boston, Baltimore, connecting with cities in Latin America and a couple of cities in Africa. And turns out that some of the tips that some of the mayors in Guatemala or in Brazil were doing, the representatives from the United States were like, hey, we haven't tried that. That actually sounds a really cool idea. Some of the most difficult sustainable development goals are really global, are really about learning from across, and is no longer this idea north to south transfer. It is really global communities learning together.
Thank you, Ede. Shauhan, there is so much discussion about communities of practice. How do we connect people on communities when we are all virtual? You sit in the knowledge department, right? That is our role. How do we make sure that everybody feels like a knowledge worker?
Yeah, I actually like to carry from the discussion we just had with our two colleagues. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Teresa, to talk about this wonderful, who are we actually? Everybody's knowledge worker. It's not either or, as Ed just said. You know, I actually feel we are practitioners, we are researchers, we are developers, we are creators, we are innovators, we are designers, we are project team leaders, and then we are doing multitasking. And we are very much willing to do that. So it is really, really fun. So I'm really inspired by this morning, the VP Bamban and VP Bruce, Vivek, and Susan, everybody, to talk about ADB's culture change when it comes to climate, client-centric ownership, trustworthiness, transformational. I just want to give you a bit of background. Who are we? And we are a remarkable organization, as Bruce mentioned this morning. We actually have technical, we have policy, we have practical dimensions in our operations. top-notch universities like Harvard, MRT, they have no means to actually deliver what operational knowledge we are delivering nowadays in our DMCs. Why? I'm thinking because we have so many laboratories in all countries we are working on. Having worked almost in 15 countries by now, and both World Bank and ADB, I actually felt we should be very proud of what we are doing. And ADB is a unique platform. We should capture a lot of knowledge we are generating in our operations. For example, this is a pandemic year. Since last year and this year, we have really utilized our instrument called policy-based lending and innovated at CPRO. We also did EAL, emergency disaster lending. I actually, in my previous job, I led the EAL in the field without giving a lot of we can make decisions in the field already. And we reach out the knowledge department like SDCC, now IM, to get support to formalize ADB team to help. So we do have policy framework for our CPROs. We have means to work on some sectors, like in a bad shape we haven't worked on, like in health, education, and sometimes very difficult areas like social protection. Sometimes we found out the countries are willing to do the reform in the most difficult time. They are winning. You will be surprised to see how we can carry a project through, because we are generating also a lot of sector knowledge. In ADB, before you do any sector work, you have to do sector assessment. This is the knowledge. You have to do knowledge searching to find out what kind of work have been done globally before you do a project. We also have instrument like we so-called the roadmap. I can never forget when I was in East Asia, I was through to Ulaanbaatar to do a Ulaanbaatar urban sector assessment. And then I stayed there 2 months just to do work on this. So anybody new would know also ADB has the beautiful instrument called multi-tranche interventions where World Bank doesn't have it. World Bank doesn't have that MFF thing. So we generate knowledge, we give a long-term plan, we work together with the government, generate a lot of ownership on how to work a long-term plan for the next 5-10 years, just to work on both the sector issues and policy issues and project issues, deliver both infrastructure and non-infrastructure stuff. So we have to find out what works, what didn't work, and make a recommendation how to do it better. So ADB knowledge is not just in library. It is in the sector division. It is in the teams we are building on over the years. And then we generate a lot of synergies between us and among us. That is cumulative. That is the knowledge from operations.
Agreed.
So in the end, I want to say knowledge should be generated from operations and knowledge should be working for operations. I stop here. Back to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Shahan. There's so many comments coming here, and I'll try and take a few of them and start lobbing it to each of you. But first, let's talk a little bit about failures and why we should not be afraid of failures when we talk about knowledge. Eddie touched upon that a little bit. Leah, can I ask you to reflect a little bit on that? How we should embrace failures if we are supposed to be a knowledge organization?
To learn, we have to fail sometimes. Yeah. As I think Ede actually made this point earlier, that indeed for us along the way, along the journey, there will be failures, and this is where we learn. This is where we actually get more knowledge. In fact, it's through the failures where we are able to test whether something that we are thinking of would apply or not. So, for example, for me, in a past position, when I was working in technical and vocational education, I was conversing, we were exchanging, we're thinking of ideas on how we can actually have a better vocational qualification framework. And I was coming in, I was still kind of fresh in the country, and I had in mind the vocational qualification frameworks of Australia, New Zealand, and also the Singapore system. And it's a different country. And so during my conversation, they highlighted to me that, hey, we have this kind of a situation here. This is what our market, this is the labor demand, this is the labor market we're serving. And and basically they highlighted to me that, hey, Leia, they were very diplomatic, that I was wrong, that my approach was wrong. And I learned from that. And so from that on, you know what I learned, and this is actually where one of the comments comes in very well, which is we need to really learn better the demand and supply for knowledge in the DMCs, in the members that we are serving. We need to get feedback from our clients and counterparts. So here they were very kind, they were very good in giving me feedback that, hey, this is not quite the knowledge or the solution that may be the most appropriate or that we're thinking of. So we really, failure is actually a very important learning opportunity for every knowledge worker. I will
Thank
pause
you.
at this. Thank you.
Eddie, anything
So
to
two,
add?
three thoughts on failures. Actually, failures enrich stories. So when we work with counterparts in Singapore and in Japan to bring some of their urban development experiences, they would always come and present the solution. And we would say, yes, excellent to present the solution, but actually what we want to hear is the journey. Because we learned that it was actually in the receptions and in the dinners where these conversations began. What were the political challenges? How do you fight for the budget? How did you actually deal with the police and evictions? And these are the interesting stories that came on that process. And a country like Singapore, that over the course of 50 years, you still have people who remember how things were in low-income communities and slums and how the transformation happened, a journey that was way into all these processes. Second, I have to accept that we failed in documenting failures. We were never able to find a methodology to write failures. There was just too much cultural resistance in the organization to say, no, this didn't work because this, or these were all the really difficult things that happened along the way, because then failure is seen as a really bad thing. And therefore, we really had a hard time. And we tried the secret evaluation reports. We tried to write cases like the Harvard business cases, where without names but describing the problem. But I had to recognize documenting failure was really difficult. So what we tried to do is that we encourage the communities of practice, these knowledge silo breakers, to have conversations on failures without documenting. Because when you talk, people feel more comfortable telling the stories of what worked and that didn't work. And second, we realized that failure is too radical a word. Actually, what we said is that is the challenge and lessons, because it's just you took a step here, it didn't work, you move here, you found a solution. And therefore, that telling of the story is not a failure, it's actually a lesson. And I think that where's the color and the substance
Eddie,
comes in.
I was going to ask you, why is it that we find it so hard to talk about our failures? You gave a few examples of what you did, but I was going to ask Teresa and you both to jump in. Teresa, are we ready for secret evaluations at ADB?
Well, put it this way. I think when we fail, one, we have to have the courage to get up. I think that is the story of development. We do fail in some instances, and we have to admit that that is part of the journey. I will say to you that, for instance, early in my career, I was involved in a very long project preparation process. It took 5 years, and it was still going. And at the end, what I realized was, look, maybe along the way, I should have realized that there was failure, but because it was very difficult to admit, we just kept going and going and going. But had we had the courage, we would have admitted it in the first place and changed course. But what that taught me was that we need to identify potential failures early on, and have the courage to actually stop and re-examine ourselves or our interventions, and then change course if necessary. I think that, if anything, I think that to me is a valuable lesson of failure or in failure.
Great, thank you. Let's slightly pivot this to based on some of the conversations we have. What do we tell Ede, people who say, we don't have time to do knowledge work, I'm too busy processing alone? What has been your experience at World Bank? And then I'll ask Leah and Xiaohan to come in as well. Ede, over to you first.
So we did in parallel two things. We decided that we were going to do bureaucracy busters to be able to reduce the bureaucracy, to be able to open up a space for the knowledge. Second, leadership began to give the signals knowledge embedded into projects is fundamental. Extracting knowledge from projects is fundamental. In the end, what your clients, be humble. The amount of money that the World Bank is bringing to many of these countries may have been important 40, 50 years ago, is no longer more than a percentage point of their budget. And therefore, your money is really not the fundamental change. The real thing that they want you for is to really to work with them into this process. And second, they also wanted to say, oh yeah, knowledge is, this is the solution I'm bringing. And we began to say, no. This arrogant approach that I know as a project manager of this institution what you need to do is completely wrong. You really need to come to the countries and come and work with them and move away from a single solution to a menu solution, like a good Chinese restaurant that has hundreds of dishes and experiences and what worked in this place, what didn't work, and all that, so that each country, each agency has a path of development. The institutional, historical, cultural perspectives are taken, and they say, I like this, this, and that, and this is the combination that we're going to try to solve our local problems into this process. Once you start describing this, people get really excited, because in the end, you are a development professional, and the really exciting, interesting problems are the ones that have not been solved yet. That's where careers get built up.
Great point. I love this analogy of going to a Chinese restaurant and customizing your menu. Leah, how do we customize our menu in Pacific region?
Oh man, you're making me hungry, huh? With this analogy. I'm gonna have a snack soon. Anyway, but now, let me address this question. Okay. Customizing and better capture of knowledge and all that. Okay, I think let me get back to the original point on how do we incentivize people to actually do more knowledge work. And here I actually would like to pick up the comment that just came up earlier, which is lone work is knowledge work. Okay, yeah. Lone work is also knowledge work. I think we have to realize, for me, as I did say, every person here is a knowledge worker, except that knowledge is actually being shown, is demonstrated in different ways. What we have traditionally recognized are the printed stuff, and now we have the blogs, and op-ed pieces and all. But actually, how do we capture? Okay. At this point in time, we incentivize our colleagues by saying, okay, I will put it in your work plan and you deliver on this particular knowledge work. But the thing is, knowledge work also includes the policy dialogue. How do you capture that? How do you capture the advice that you give during project design? How do you capture those ideas that may be new to the country but not quite new from the sectoral perspective? So it would not be fair to other staff if we count knowledge, the knowledge sharing that goes into knowledgement, those that are only printed or that are actually in social media. Because a lot of knowledge sharing is actually taking place in conversations, in dialogues. So I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges we have. So how do we actually reward what cannot be captured? So I think this is a question I would like to pose to you, Vivek, to Ede, and to colleagues. How can we better capture that? How do we go beyond that? So better incentives.
Ede,
Thank
I'm
you.
only the moderator today. I don't have to take any of the tough questions. I'll hand it to you.
Okay, so we did three things. So we did three things, Leah. Okay, so first, we were very disciplined on counting the knowledge products, because what we found is that, yeah, they were being counted, but nobody was paying attention. At the time of delivering by the end of the fiscal year, all those knowledge products would always slip to next fiscal year. And we said, no, this is important. If you're going to have knowledge, you need to deliver the knowledge. Okay, number one. Number two, we were very serious about that realization that knowledge is not always printed. There's a lot of knowledge transfers that happen in conversations, in PowerPoints, in coffee, meetings all together in mentoring calls. And therefore, we created a space in the communities of practice where that was an integral function of who they were as a community of practice. And we had a monitoring and evaluation framework for these communities of practice on how they were growing. And they were measured, again, with what were those plans. The gardening approach that I was talking before was to really try to shape, help, and trim some of those indicators in conversations moving forward. And then finally, what was really important was the leadership change in, for example, loan processing. To say, look, at the project concept, is the leadership asking the questions on, is the real knowledge out there? How are you going to bring the best knowledge to this operation? It's creating spaces from just the formal quality review to what we call friendly fire conversations. So we had also a series of mechanisms to be able to foster that exchange and to monitor and to make sure that as part of the process, those points of inserting knowledge was an integral part of processing the loans, because, as you said, this embedding of the knowledge in the real development is there. You can't have the research department, you cannot have those who prefer to do analytical work, you cannot have the knowledge teams thinking that this is just the important part of knowledge. It's real, on the ground, solution making that is the real knowledge altogether.
That's great. Teresa, Xiaohan,
Yes.
anything to respond to on this?
Let me add, I also looked at replication, the potential for replication as a way to measure knowledge and actually to demonstrate value add through our lending. When we see potential for replication, we look at it as a form of knowledge sharing. There may not be a publication associated with it, but through the dialogue and through the client-centric approach that we will follow in helping craft a solution, we in the process do share the knowledge that we pick up from other project experience that we have, and that to us is equally and if not even more valuable in actually sharing knowledge to other developing member countries.
Yep. So
And if I
Let
may
me come in.
Vivek, on replication, I think that this is, I really like that comment, because in the end, it's really that germ of creativity that becomes and connects all across. I think that an opportunity that ADB has that is unique in organizations is to say, you're solving similar development challenges in different places. You are like a unique laboratory of development, and therefore not waiting for a solution to go through the full cycle and then replicate, but actually have your project managers talking to each other and becoming experiments, live experiments, learning from each other, so that different solutions emerge and different options and variations come, so that it is like a positive virus of solutions moving forward and replicating across. That ability, very few organizations have, and that large presence that you have in the countries. Once you connect them, and it doesn't have to go all through Manila, or it doesn't have to go all through Washington, like in the World Bank, that connectivity and that ability to rapidly replicate makes the institution much better, makes it a lot more valuable by the countries that you're working on right now. We at that point, what we did also was to connect a lot of knowledge and innovation. Meaning innovation, just for innovation, is another thing that you ask the organizations. Is your project innovative? Everybody says, yes, very innovative. I've never seen a project manager who says, no, my project is boring, not innovative. Everybody's innovative. And therefore, the reality was, how do you actually monitor innovation? How do you define metrics that allows you to understand, as a director general, is your portfolio really innovative? And how do you distribute the innovation all the way from replication of that process all the way to what I used to call NASA-style innovations, the iPads of development that allows you to do that, so that you have a balanced portfolio of innovation, and then gets connected to the knowledge management altogether. So I like very much that point on replication as a value proposition, as an indicator of success on knowledge.
Fantastic. Xiaohan,
Maybe-
how do we measure our knowledge? How do we measure our impact? Because I see the thread of comments on the side. It's moving from communities of practice to impact of knowledge and tacit knowledge. I'll lob one at you and then we'll ask others to jump in. So, first, let's start with how do we measure the impact of things such as policy advice?
I just want to add, in addition to replication, we also need to look at the new areas, the cross-cutting, cross-sector areas. For example, the tourism, right? Tourism is a new area and it's cross-cutting. And then we just issued the green bond and blue bond, and we have to work with municipalities, and we don't need a formal invitation to do those things. So in addition to really replicate to what we have already done in these traditional sectors, this is a golden time for ADB to work in these new areas. I think 10% of GDP is in the region is really in the new sectors like or thematic area of tourism. So that as manager, we need to actually incentivize mission leaders. In my old days, I actually encourage all my staff who are really, really busy to make time to continuously learning. And they have to do peer reviewers of other very heavy like South Asia department. And every single team leader has to do a lot of peer reviews every year. Because if they don't do well, the others will not do that for them also. So they have to make time for the knowledge sharing. They have to make time to do new things. And then we as a team, very closely knitted team, we work very well together. And this is that when it comes to trustworthy, when it comes to transformational, I want to relate the knowledge work to this ADB culture change. It has a lot of things to do. We can share when we have more time. Over back to you, Vivek.
Thanks, Shahal. I'm also conscious of time. We have around 4 to 5 minutes to wrap up, but let's touch one last topic about knowledge monopoly. Knowledge is not the prerogative of Washington and Manila. Teresa, how do we make sure tacit knowledge amongst our staff on the ground are captured? Sonomi Tanaka had an excellent comment there about tacit knowledge, and I'll put it up on screen right now.
Well, resident missions are very much part of our project preparation process. They come in at concept stage. They share with us the challenges of the country, in-depth assessments that they have also performed in the course of doing field work are actually shared during these meetings. And I think by bringing teams together, that's how we facilitate an honest and candid exchange of views. And it is in this format that I believe we bring both HQ, our headquarters, and our resident missions together to really craft and formulate a knowledge solution for the client. Let me just give you an example of air quality in Mongolia. So how did we get to air quality in Mongolia? We had experience in China, but we also needed to understand what were the pain points in Mongolia when it comes to air quality. And what we found out was that the use of materials for heating during the winter time also needed to be addressed. And that was input that we got from the field. And so from that, we developed not only a policy-based loan, but we also developed part of the program to address the materials that they will use to augment their heat supply in winter, and to use cleaner fuels in the process actually facilitated, I would say, a much better designed air quality improvement program. So that's how we bring knowledge from the field back to our headquarters
Point.
in the formulation stage.
Point. Thank you, Teresa. Leah, anything to add? Any last words here? Do knowledge people in headquarters have an advantage?
Hi, Vivek. I think I would like to refer to what Gambir has posted. Gambir Bhatt has posted here. Knowledge will not be a monopoly if everyone is treated as a knowledge worker. Fully agree. Everyone is a knowledge worker. The question is working. How do we work together and pulling it all together? And I think in the case of the ADB, with one ADB approach and everyone really working together, contributing their ideas, I think that's the only way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Xiaohan?
Maybe I could add.
Yeah.
Actually, when it comes to RMHQ collaboration, there's a lot of good experience to share. So whatever we see, wherever we see this task has been run by somebody, either in HQ or RM, it works on both ways. As long as the team trusts each other and like to work together, and then there's a way to go. Everybody's knowledge worker. And we see ADO updates. We're working actually closely between among the HQ and RM, and we have a lot of updates from RM on the Asian outlook, how the macroeconomic work is going to be looking like, and there's a lot of local ingredients there. Over back to you.
Thank you, Ede. Let's give you the last word.
That's why I said that the knowledge management and the diversity and inclusion agendas are so closely together. Knowledge has to be diverse, knowledge has to be inclusive. And therefore, this tends to be a human resources agenda. It's not. It's really also linked to knowledge management agenda. In our communities of practice, we were very purposeful. In the annual work plan, a specific section of the work plan was like, how are you making sure that the RMs are really an integral part of what is it that is happening? We also made sure that some of the leadership of these communities of practice was done not only by staff in the RM, but also by national staff that had that unique knowledge of the cultural experiences and institutions. And then finally, we at some point, actually, there was an independence movement of knowledge in our team where they said, we are sick and tired of having these knowledge events late at night. And therefore, they decided to secede, and they had knowledge events without Washington at times that were far more useful for Asia and for Africa. And therefore, if Washington wants to hear about it, they can watch the video. That process of empowering the RMs is actually, and to say, this is where the knowledge is happening, this is where the solutions are taking place, is a transformational process that results in the end in much better projects, much better support for the clients.
Thank you, Ede. I think with that, we are at 2:59. We have a minute to go. And I just want to thank our panelists before I do a very quick summary. I couldn't even possibly keep up with all the comments on the side. But let me try and summarize what we discussed today. One, the knowledge monopoly is a myth. If everyone is a knowledge worker, there is no knowledge monopoly. Second, communities of practice. That is an important way to go. Knowledge only flows through these communities. Knowledge flows through people, not through documents. Communication is key. We need to make sure that we are producing the right knowledge for the right people at the right time. And that is something that is our responsibility, whether it is loan or knowledge, that does not matter. Everything goes in one package. Lastly, we should focus on our comparative advantage and be selective in the kind of knowledge work that we are doing. But mostly, I just want to say, Ede, I love the Chinese takeout menu analogy. That is going to stick with us. Okay, so we pick and choose what we have to give to a country at any given time. So the Chinese takeout menu is the best way to go for us in these situations. With that, thank you very much to our panelists, Ede, Leah, Xiaohan, Teresa. We did not have enough time to cover this in 1 hour. But if you have more time and if there are any more questions to us, do send it to us. We'll be happy to take it to our panelists and get you an answer. Thank you very much once again.